In 2008, families in one African country needed a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Their government printed a banknote worth $100 trillion and it still couldn't cover a bus fare. This isn't a story about a poor country. This used to be called the breadbasket of Africa. This is the story of how a government destroyed its own money in under 10 years. Rewind to 1980. Zimbabwe had just won its independence and its economy was the envy of the region. Commercial farms stretched across the high veld, producing enough tobacco, maize, and beef to feed the nation and export the surplus across Africa. The new currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, launched stronger than the US dollar. For nearly 2 decades, that ground held. Then, starting in the year 2000, it began to crack. The government launched a sweeping land reform program, seizing thousands of commercial farms and redistributing them, often without the training or resources needed to keep them productive. Agricultural output, the backbone of the economy, collapsed within a few short years. At the same time, the government was funding a costly military involvement in the Congo and an unbudgeted payout to tens of thousands of war veterans. Tax revenue was falling, spending kept climbing. Zimbabwe chose the most dangerous fix. It started printing money to cover the difference. Printing money to cover a deficit works exactly like it sounds, until it doesn't. The extra currency, chasing the same shrinking pile of goods, meant prices didn't just rise, they accelerated. Hyperinflation almost never starts as one dramatic decision. It starts as a series of individually reasonable choices to cover a shortfall, until the shortfall becomes the whole system. By 2008, some economists estimated prices were doubling every 24 to 48 hours at the worst point. Banks limited how much cash people could withdraw each day because there wasn't enough physical paper being printed fast enough to keep up with the numbers. Picture getting paid on a Friday morning. If you didn't spend that money by the afternoon, it could lose half its value before the weekend started. People carried cash in shopping bags, sacks, even wheelbarrows, not because they were rich, but because it took that much paper just to buy dinner. A lifetime of savings could become worthless in the time it took to walk to the bank. In January 2009, Zimbabwe's central bank issued the highest denomination note ever printed by any country in modern history, 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars. It was worth roughly enough to buy a few loaves of bread if you could find any on the shelves. What that number really represents isn't wealth, it's the visible proof of a government that had completely lost control of its own currency. By April 2009, the government gave up on its own currency entirely. The Zimbabwean dollar was suspended and the country allowed the US dollar and other foreign currencies to be used instead. And almost overnight, the chaos stopped because the source of the spiral had finally been removed. Zimbabwe's currency didn't collapse because of one bad year. It collapsed because a government kept choosing short term fixes over long term trust until there was no trust left to spend. If this helped you understand how money really works, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.